Okay, we're back again with Two Guys in the Cloud. I'm Bob Agno here with Elliot. Elliot is fresh off of vacation, so he should be ready with great new insights and a rested brain. How's everything going, Elliot?
Well, good, but I'm here with a tan.
Yeah, well that helps.
And
I see
a
that.
little bit of a
little bit of a beard. Yeah.
Yeah, so it's a full package.
Nice.
It's all, yeah.
Nice.
So I know I'm that's the thing about vacations is you come back and you're charged again. So
That's right.
Yeah, excited to be back and excited about our discussion today.
Yeah, and it's a fun time. It's spring. We've got opening day for baseball tomorrow. We got March Madness, NCAA basketball, but that's all going to take a seat for our guest today, fresh from Belgium. Nele, hi, how are you?
Hi, I'm great. Thank you very much.
Great, thanks for joining us today.
Nele, are you in Brussels or around Brussels? Around the area?
Belgium isn't that big, so everything seems to be a bit around Brussels.
Okay.
Wherever in Belgium you're somewhere around Brussels. No, I think I'm about an hour's drive from Brussels.
Got it. I was in Brussels 3 years ago, maybe, and just loved it. It was just such a beautiful city and just great experience. So I love your little corner of the world.
Yeah. It is little if you compare it to the US, so yeah, definitely.
I see sun coming out of your window. Is it nice there today?
It's actually the first very nice day of the year at the moment. Apparently more than 20 degrees out there, which is in Celsius, so not in Fahrenheit.
Right.
Yeah.
Just in case you think.
No, but don't I want to do something like triple the number? Or something like that. Is it so we would say something like 60 degrees Fahrenheit?
I have no clue.
But
I used to get this in school, I think, but I forgot about it by now. How to put that transition in.
Yeah, and I clearly did too. But if you're saying it's a nice day, that's awesome. Great. I'm happy. I'm happy for the fine people of Belgium that they have a nice day today. That's great.
Yeah, they're not that often in spring.
Yeah,
mostly it's rain.
Understand. So Bob, what are we here to talk about today?
So we're going to talk about Oracle in the cloud today, and a lot of different aspects of Oracle. Everything from how customers are leveraging Oracle in the public cloud, but also some different areas with Oracle and things like Audit Defense, how to be right licensed with Oracle, and a lot of different topics with Oracle in the cloud. So it looks like, Blair just pinged in and says 20 degrees Celsius is 68 Fahrenheit. So that is a very nice day you're having.
That is a very nice day.
Thanks. Yeah. Well done, Blair. Well done, Blair. Adding value to the show. Top producer value. So Nele, we always start off with our guests and let them introduce themselves and talk a little bit about your background. We found that one of the neater part of what we do in this podcast is we get to know our guests a little bit deeper. So if you could kind of walk us through your kind of career and your journey and let us know how you got to where you are today, that'd be great.
Okay, so I have absolutely nada IT background, just so you know. I actually had I did economics at school. And I had a degree in economics. And then due to circumstances, I ended up going abroad for a few years, which is here, that was in Ireland. And once you're there, you need to find a job. So I kind of got into, believe it or not, telephonic support for printers. Supporting people that have issues with their printers and getting them to work and stuff like that. Very funny situation sometimes. And it was interesting and nice. But then once we started moving back to the direction of Belgium, we didn't immediately move back to Belgium. We first did a little bit of a stop in the Netherlands. I actually was then hired by Oracle to be part of their LMS department, which is the License Management Services department.
Okay.
Or in other words, the auditing department at Oracle. So, and that's kind of how I rolled into the IT and especially into Oracle. And then once I've done that for a few years, we decided to move back to our roots, go back to Belgium. Not that the Netherlands is that far off, but still just wanted to be closer to the family since we started our own. And as such, coming back to Belgium, it was either staying with Oracle in a role that I didn't really believe in. It was still in the LMS department, but I didn't believe in the role they had in mind. And so I looked for something new, and I ended up working for Insight. And then the first few years, I mainly did a mix of anything which was software asset management, ranging from Microsoft, Adobe, Symantec, to, of course, Oracle, until Insight decided that an Oracle practice would be a very interesting thing to have, where license consulting was concerned. And they asked me to join the EMEA team for that purpose of setting up that service. And that's how I ended up here.
There you go.
And I've been doing that for 7 years by now.
So Bob,
I think
Bob, I think you're muted.
Yeah.
You're right, talking on mute. That's very funny. Nele and I got to meet actually right before COVID happened. We had a summit in New York City a year ago, February. So we got to meet right before the world shut down. So that was pretty interesting. But good to see you again here live on Teams. And we're going to kind of talk a little bit about Oracle today and some of the kind of nuances that clients are seeing now and how it's running in the cloud. I have a software asset management background and audit defense background as well from the Microsoft side. So learning more about Oracle is always very interesting to me. We work with Nele and her team on engagements here in the US for our US clients, but it's always very interesting how different these software providers are and, how they're functioning in the new environment in the cloud these days. So now I just wanted to kind of turn the floor over to you and see, how are our customers leveraging Oracle in the cloud these days?
Well, there's a few things that if we talk Oracle on the cloud, there's a few things you need to realize. First of all, Oracle has their own cloud environment, OCI, Oracle Cloud Infrastructure. I think everybody knows that. That's in IT. However, it never really seemed to be going that well in the past. Well, as we see it since the start of COVID, you see a very gradual incline in use of Oracle Cloud Infrastructure because, well, people need more performance, need more resources, need more cloud availability, easier use. So Oracle becomes a kind of a player in the market now as well.
So I'm going to just sort of be
definitely
the guy that asks questions, in the sense that I don't know. It's kind of fun for me because I don't know Oracle. And so I have all these questions. And so I'm wondering, when we say Oracle in the cloud, my first thought is this a infrastructure as a service scenario? Is it a SaaS-based cloud? Meaning it, from a just sort of pure infrastructure as a service perspective, allowing Oracle customers to, prop up servers, virtual servers, the infrastructure services that part of that. Is that what we're talking about? Or is it much more, hey, you can serve up, Oracle ERP through the cloud? So that's sort of where my first question goes.
So if we talk about software as a service, the ERP in the cloud, that type of thing, Oracle is already out there quite frequently used. So that's not the market they have challenges with. The challenging part in the past was the cloud infrastructure and PaaS platform as a service.
Mhm.
But as with their on-prem, they offer the full shebang. They have practically, well, everything is maybe the big word, but a lot. This is Oracle we're talking about. This is a gigantic company, and they kind of go for it full on now. Looks like I lost connection for a second.
No.
You did for a second, but you're back.
Yeah, but
you're
you're
back.
okay. So, okay, that's interesting. And so when what they're trying to compete with, I think you said OCI, right?
OCI, that's the competition with AWS and Azure.
Oh, perfect. That's exactly what I was thinking. All right, so that's yeah, that makes perfect sense. All right, so Oracle's beginning to see an uptick in terms of OCI over the last year, as every other cloud provider has. So that's interesting. Okay.
Yes, definitely.
So does Oracle make it? How do I ask this? Like from a Microsoft standpoint, Microsoft workloads, Microsoft will say run best and cheapest on Azure. Does Oracle make that for their own public cloud? For example, is it more expensive to run Oracle on AWS and Azure than Oracle's cloud?
In principle, it is. Yeah.
Okay.
So up till a couple of years ago, it wasn't. So just so you know, Azure and AWS, they are the only two so-called accepted public cloud providers for Oracle software. What does that mean? That is, if you have Oracle in your on-prem environment and you want to move it on AWS, you want to move it on Azure, these are the so-called authorized cloud environments, and you can do that. You're allowed to do that from a licensing perspective. And then next to that, there's a very definite idea on how that requires calculating. So you have one process license. If you move it to AWS, that's the way you look at it. If you move it to Azure, that's the way you look at it. There's a fixed principle behind that, say it like that.
Much like the Celsius and Fahrenheit conversion.
That's right.
It's not as complex as the Celsius to Fahrenheit conversion, though, but it is similar to that. Yeah, definitely. So,
and obviously OCI is another alternative, I'm sure, where if I want to move.
Yes, so that's another alternative. Although if you look at the document, the so-called policy document that states the authorized cloud environments, OCI is not mentioned on there, strangely enough. However, there is another document of Oracle that is also, dictating rules and policies, and there is mention on how you can do that. However, within OCI, there's other alternatives as well. So if you, for instance, say, I want to take my on-prem to Azure, you can do that by moving your on-prem licenses to Azure, or you can create a virtual machine in Azure. And now I'm thinking not with Azure, but Azure, you can no longer buy the software at Azure. You can with AWS. There's still the possibility to buy an Oracle database in the cloud on AWS and buy the software through AWS. Where Azure is concerned, you can only kind of drop your own licenses on it.
Right, okay. That bring your own license concept,
yes,
BYOS. Yeah.
Indeed. And if you then move to OCI, you have actually three options. You have the subscription option, as you call it, which is pure subscription, database as a service. You have the bring your own license option to combined with subscription, which means you have database as a service, but you bring your own license. In that area, your database is also managed by Oracle, or the updates, the things that go with that, the maintenance part. And then the last but not least, you also have the possibility to kind of work the same way as you would with Azure, is drop your database on it, manage the database yourself, and bring your own license. So that's the pure bring your own license model. So depending on what we're looking at, there are different possibilities what the licensing is concerned.
And OCI is not inherently less expensive than the Azure or AWS alternative.
As we see, there's a few things you need to look at it if you want to look at that way, right? So you, of course, have the cost of your virtual machine or your bare metal machine, depending on what you choose as a platform or as the infrastructure, right? So in that regards, I think, although I'm not a cloud specialist from a pricing perspective, but what we see is both the pricing parameters that come into play with these three environments are quite similar. The only problem is it's very hard to make a differentiation and see which ones is more expensive, because each type of environment, including storage, including networking, including your compute environment, it's all just a tad different. As a result, it's very hard to make pricing comparisons between that layer. Where the database is concerned, we know based on the analysis we do that Azure and AWS tend to be less, from a pricing perspective, from a licensing perspective, less interesting to go to than OCI, which is logical. Because of the way it's calculated. You would need more licenses on AWS or Azure than you would need for a similar setup of environment in Oracle. So pure on the licensing cost side, it is likely more cheaper to run it on Oracle, which is, I think, quite logical than if you would run it on AWS and Azure.
100%. Yeah, that makes perfect sense.
Yeah.
So it's interesting that Google is not part of their approved public cloud. Is there a reason for that, do you think? Is it just, do you think maybe that's an up and coming one and they haven't got there yet, or the demand for Oracle on Google is not there yet? Just wanted to pick your brain on that one.
We have not come across one client that is running Oracle on Google.
Interesting.
We have found a lot of clients that are running it on AWS already or on Azure already. And now the last year, we've come across clients that are asking questions about running on OCI. We've just finished the first full project on that a client that is only running on OCI for both the database and the middleware side. So, but in principle, AWS and Azure, we find that the Oracle deployed on there for a lot of our clients. And yeah, especially enough, most of them have a mix of the two.
Right.
So we don't see a client saying we have on-prem and then next to that only AWS or only Azure. It happens, but most common we have both AWS and Azure deployments in the same client environment, which I think is an interesting one to know.
Yeah, is it definitely? We're seeing that here in the U.S. too, with multi-cloud strategies for most enterprises now. They find, costs, economy, different negotiations with different public clouds. So it's interesting how everybody is moving different workloads to different public clouds and trying to find the value in, one over the other. So that's interesting. I think AWS, which probably had the lion's share early on in the early adopters, are now seeing Azure playing a lot of catch up in that space, which is pretty cool.
Yeah, definitely.
There's probably a level of redundancy there as well. If I have two public clouds, if there's an outage on one, at the very least, I've got other workloads that are persistent on the other, assuming that they both don't go out. So I think there's a hedge there as well. That's probably another reason we're seeing this. Maybe, that's a thought in all of this.
It's also interesting for Oracle public cloud, because are they going to just be the public cloud for Oracle databases and SaaS applications? Or are they going to try to compete with an Azure and an AWS and be, this mega public cloud? I'm sure that's what they would prefer, but it almost seems right now they're kind of a niche player for their own technology. Is that a fair statement?
Yeah, that's definitely a fair statement. And actually, to be honest, I think the original idea for the Oracle Cloud was indeed to go and play in the area of AWS and Azure to kind of have a platform that fits all. Right. But I kind of got rumors in that that a few years ago, things started really changing at Oracle, and there's now an Oracle on Oracle idea. So where it's not that common anymore, or it's not really the idea anymore to allow just anything to run on Oracle. The idea is that if you want to run something on Oracle, you need to have Oracle on it. So, so the whole idea of making it available for everybody, for everything, I believe they stepped away from that. So that niche playing part is actually where they're going, which is in one way what they've always done, right? So it's always been Oracle on Oracle, and they have the full stack, and they wanted to kind of offer the whole shebang to the clients, and that was the whole idea. Whether it's a good move, I don't know. This is a very big company, and they tend to gain market share by pushing things through. So initially
I wonder if that's a archaic approach, in the sense that it seems that what works in our world is sort of an open market approach. If you think about the Microsoft evolution, where Microsoft ran into problems was when it tried to be very proprietary, when it, it was not open. And think of the Ballmer days, right? And then Satya comes around and opens up everything. It makes it much more of a, an integrated philosophy where whatever it is that we have, we're going to let it, attach to any of our competitors, understanding that that's how we're going to insert ourselves into the marketplace. And I wonder if Oracle's now going to learn that lesson, in the sense that, it seems to me that one of the smart things that they've been doing is opening up Oracle to Azure and AWS, because all that's going to do is give the Oracle database and the Oracle applications the ability to grow within other markets, if you will, the Azure market or the AWS market. But, if they only only focus the OCI cloud to really support just Oracle applications, then it's limiting the market of OCI, and they're just going to run further and further behind AWS and Azure. And it just it may end up becoming a very limited lifespan, for OCI as an example.
Well, the thing is, one of the things you need to know is, as far as we know, lots of things are changing within Oracle these past few years. So it might as well be that this was a declaration that applied to things happening 3 years ago, and they've now moved on already. And one of the things, for instance, we do know is now that you can run VMware on Oracle. So, which before, and to be honest, that created a whole bunch of misunderstandings in the market. The fact that there was an article that appeared about VMware being now okay for using it on Oracle, or vice versa, Oracle on VMware, it had to do with certification. And now this requires a bit of background, which I don't know if you guys have this, but running Oracle on, and I'm talking database, middleware, and sometimes apps as well, but mainly database and middleware, running Oracle on VMware can get very expensive very quickly because of the way that Oracle licenses those environments. However, up until a couple of years ago, the tendency was as well that if you were running Oracle on VMware and you had a support issue, you had a problem with the product not running, you needed to recreate that environment of VMware, recreate that exact same issue, and then you would get support. Otherwise, the support guys would say, well, it could be VMware, right?
Yeah.
So in the meantime, there's been the certification, and that certification was on the fact that you can run Oracle on VMware now, and you can get support on it without them requiring you to recreate the situation, right? This actually created the confusion with a lot of our clients coming to us and saying, oh, we can now license Oracle on VMware. That's no longer a problem. Well, it never has been a problem. It only has been very expensive, right? So because of the way that if you license Oracle on VMware, you need to license all the hosts. It's that simple. And depending on which version of VMware, the number of hosts goes from only the hosts in your cluster to all the hosts in all your vCenters. So you can imagine having a big VMware environment could become very expensive.
So as a software asset management, I guess, storyline, you know, and maybe this is to both of you. I've always thought software asset management is reducing in complexity and need because more and more things are going to the cloud. But as I'm listening to you talk, I'm wondering if it's becoming more complex and there's a greater need for software asset management because so many of our clients have this world that's in between, you know, on-premise and the cloud. And maybe it's not always going to be just the cloud or just on-premise. It's probably going to be both. And we have investments that our clients are making where these rules between what's on-premise and what's on the cloud are sort of interact, right? So it's becoming more, more critical to understand from a software asset management perspective. And maybe it's not just software asset management anymore, but it's really just sort of portfolio alignment or something like that. Is that a fair way to put it? Am I kind of saying that correct?
Yeah, you are. And I think what's interesting is that the SAM market is much different now, right? When we talked about software asset management 10, 15 years ago, it was staying compliant, making sure you got what you paid for, making sure you didn't have rogue software spend. That still goes on today, but a lot of clients are really interested in understanding how do we have that migration? How are we able to license in both places? How do we not double spend for the cloud and for on-prem, like you mentioned? And it's really a more what I like to call modernized SAM, because you really need to look at the environment and the complexities of that environment. At the same time, have some workflow. Many SAM has become all about workflow and integrating with Ariba and ServiceNow these days. So it's just very interesting it's not about counting licenses anymore. It's more about understanding your environment and how things run. Nele, I'd love to get your take on that as well.
Yeah, you're quite right, especially if you have these models of bring your own license, right? It means that you still need those licenses. And if you have the hybrid model of partially on-prem, partially in the cloud, yeah, you can't just say, oh, I'm using it here now and I'm using it there the other day. That's not going to happen. They will never allow that to, right? So yeah, software asset management, as you look at it, it is needed. However, what we see primarily within Oracle as well is optimization is required because of a lot of clients. Look at it this way. As I said, AWS has their own way of licensing if you want to move your Oracle there. If you do it on Azure, it's similar, but just a tad different. If you go on OCI, it's again similar, but just that tad different. And then if you run it on, even in your physical environment, in your on-prem environment, every single infrastructure setup that you have where you run Oracle might have a totally different way of counting the licenses. So it's very hard for a lot of clients to kind of keep track of how do I count this environment and what is the correct licensing and how do my contracts map into that, and am I not paying too much? And what we tend to start seeing is we see clients optimizing the infrastructure side, but still looking for information on, which contracts can I drop, which support can I drop without any consequences. I have an archive here. Do I still need to get that supported or not? I need to keep this. Well, I'm going to move it there, but what is that implication on the licensing side if I do that? So it's more than only pure baseline determining what the back and forth is. For me, the risk assessment, the actual baseline, that's only the starting point of the project and of the value that we offer, where we go and look, if you restructure that or if you move it there, it will save you that many licenses. We see here these contracts, you only use one or two products in a contract, that's 120K in renewal value. Maybe you should either pick these two up or actually drop the whole contract and repurchase only those two licenses in a new contract. It will reduce your total spend, your total cost of ownership. So it goes beyond just knowing what you have, which is really important. You need to know what you have if you want to do something about it, if you don't want to run any risks. But I think the main value of software asset management or optimization assessment, or how you want to call it, is knowing what you can do to reduce your spend or reduce any risks.
Right.
Yeah, it's fascinating. There's layers of economic optimization. I'll call them opportunities. And you were right on there, Nele. There's a lot of conversation around infrastructure optimization in terms of consumption. How do I reduce consumption? How do I optimize consumption? But there's this other entire layer that you're talking about, which makes as much, is as important. And, and that's without, perhaps the acquisition or portfolio optimization of what's actually driving the consumption too. So great opportunity for, many of our clients, or the market in general, to really optimize their spend, period. So that's really fascinating.
I have a great example of that. I just finished a project. It was actually a US project where we've done a 3-year project with a client in the US. And initially the purpose was just getting a baseline and then finding some optimization opportunities. And now, in the meantime, now that the 3rd year has passed, we've actually managed to find them 2 different opportunities. One is a direct 25% cut in their support costs, contracts that they could just drop because they don't need them. And then another 25% optional reduction, further reduction on top of, because we identified a couple of contracts where only 1 or 2 products were used. So there was a little bit of extra cost behind, which kind of will reflect later. But in total, we could reduce their support spend with 50% by just doing this analysis, and so by optimizing the way they have been spending, and by optimizing the infrastructure setup, reducing some risk areas, etc. So that's what's massive.
Yeah, absolutely. Do you think, so the great opportunity for us to compare notes between North America and EMEA in terms of this world? Do you think that it all kind of is in alignment, or are we seeing it? Just listening to Nele, it seems as if there's a bit more of a proactive position statement in EMEA than I think we run into in North America. But is that unfair? What's your take on that, Bob?
I think it's software asset management. Between the markets in EMEA and in North America, I think they're different. I see, for example, at Insight, our EMEA practice has a very strong, what I call managed service, right? Where they work with customers on more of an outsourced / scenario. They may take a snow environment, a FlexAir environment, and manage it all up for a customer. In North America, I find it to be a little bit more project-based oriented. For example, when we engage Nele and her team here in North America, the one she was just mentioning was obviously a 3-year commitment, but a lot of clients like to do, like a baseline, right? And I really want to ask Nele about Audit Defense, because Oracle has always been a very strong player in the audit market. And there's a fear by many clients that they're going to be audited by Oracle. It's not if, it's more when. And so, a lot of clients are concerned about that. So what we do a lot of the times is come in and do a one-off baseline project, whether it's a Microsoft, an Oracle, or IBM, and help clients do that on a one-off. We've seen SAM staffs internally at different enterprises here in the US reduce. We've seen a lot of the market move from some of the larger SAM tools to more ServiceNow or cloud providers that do it more on a just good enough basis than having 40 people run a SAM environment. So it's I think there is some differences between the two markets, but I think the underlying approach is very similar. I just think the difference, the way North American clients like it versus EMEA, maybe differ in the managed service versus the project-based engagements. Nele, what are your thoughts on that?
Well, we do have quite a bit of managed services in EMEA, as you say. However, well, when Oracle is concerned, what I see is indeed that we have a lot of clients that buy one-off, but they come back. So
Yeah, right.
yeah, it's not a managed service as such because, well, they're not buying multiple year projects, but they do have one project, take some time to kind of restructure, make some changes, and then come back to do another run, to say it like that, to determine
Right.
what we did that actually have effect, did the changes take place that should have taken place, etc. Because of course, let me say it like that, in 90% of the projects that we do, we find licensing deficits that are, let's say, very concerning for the client. And so the whole focus goes from, we need to know what we have, to, we need to optimize, we need to do something because we can't buy that much software, it's too expensive. And that shift is, I'm telling you, the moment you present those numbers, that shift can go very quickly. And then, yeah, once you start, we give them some ideas on what they can do, but of course, the things they can do will depend on the infrastructure setup they have, the choices that the company makes, the strategies that the company decides to take towards Oracle. That's a lot of those areas. And we advise for that, but yeah, there are actions that clients need to take, and certain infrastructure changes are not something you take, yeah, one day to the other. It takes time. It takes a few months to kind of put these actions in place and make these changes happen. So that's something we see. Where maturity is concerned, I don't think you can really say that one market is upfront or behind the other. I think it's more client by client based.
Great.
So I have had US clients that are really, really mature in software asset management, that really, when you ask them for details, they can give it like that. Then you have clients in EMEA that have the same thing, and vice versa, where there is no real view, there's no grip on. So you have those type of clients in both markets. Yeah, go
Really
ahead.
quick, earlier, Bob brought up Ariba and ServiceNow, and my sense is that that's the connecting point between, hey, I'm an organization, I need to get control of how we acquire software and then manage our portfolio. Is that the platform, or are those the platforms that help with that, or is that off? I mean, where does Ariba and ServiceNow fit within the SAM conversation?
So a lot of so ServiceNow is fairly new player to the SAM tool market. They've been around, I don't know, 5 years or so. And they just recently went into the Gartner Magic Quadrant of SAM tools with Flexera and Snow. And I've seen a trend in the US is a lot of customers are electing to go to ServiceNow for a couple reasons. One, ServiceNow has a really good brand recognition for enterprises. And two, it gives them what they see as a kind of snap in and play kind of SAM orientation that already integrates into their ServiceNow environment. So, for example, you can purchase a Snow or Flexera, which is a very strong SAM platform. You can deploy it, you can get it configured, up and running, and then some of them are connectors, and some of them have to be custom developed integration into a ServiceNow or an Ariba platform, right? And when you do that, it's time, money, resources, things that a lot of organizations struggle with paying for in the long run. So if you can get a ServiceNow and you can snap that in and get a lot of that integration, quote unquote, out of the box, many clients are electing to do that over doing a longer deployment in a Snow or Flexera. So I've seen the market kind of shift there a little bit here in the US, because it's just been interesting that SAM and that workflow is really important for a lot of the enterprise, right? It's just not like, get me a report out of Snow now. It's I want it integrated into my workflow, so I know I'm not buying extra SQL servers when I don't have to, and I know on the fly exactly how many I have in my procurement, and if I do need to buy a copy of project for somebody, you know, and we don't have any on the shelf, I can then integrate that into you know, an Insight website and have all that integrated right there. So, you know, the clients I talk to a lot are looking for that integrated workflow from a ServiceNow, from an Ariba, so that they really understand what they have and can make on-the-fly decisions rather than calling calling Al in the SAM department and say, Al, how many SQL servers do we have today, right? I'll get you a report and I'll get that to you by Friday, right? That doesn't work anymore.
No, that makes sense. And you know, I've seen different models where there's this sort of, if you think about SAM as a managed service, it's this sort of combination of the platform and then the expertise of the provider in sort of people, process, technology. You know, there's the platform, there's the service, you know, expertise, and that's how we provide this ongoing understanding of where, you know, entitlements may be, or where you know, deficiencies may be in terms of licensing. If you were to think about EMEA, Nele, is ServiceNow, is it Flexera, is it Snow? What are the platforms that seem to be persistent out there?
Well, if I look at EMEA, well, the things that I come into play are mainly Snow, Flexera, iQuate, which is maybe not as known in the US, but it's a big player for Oracle data collection. So those primarily also, I'm trying to find the name, Aspera. It's another one.
Yeah,
I love
Aspera.
some of the names.
Yeah,
Sorry?
Aspera is big in the US. Aspera is interesting because they have a little bit of a different model. They sort of, I don't want to say give away the platform because they don't, but they do it more on a low cost, and then they provide services on top of it. So they have a kind of little different model than some of the others, which is interesting. Now, before we run out of time, I really want to have your expertise on Oracle Audits. I know I mentioned earlier that Oracle is a big player in the audit game, and with COVID, I think we've seen a lot of publishers ramp up their audit approach so that they can maybe get some lost revenue from the months that they were down and not gaining that revenue that they expected. So one, I wanted to see is, have we seen an uptick in Oracle audits since COVID? And then two, what are some of the best practices you could give customers to protect themselves against an Oracle audit?
Okay, on your first question, ramp up, not really. Oracle always has been a very active auditor.
They're always ramped.
So it's not that they're doing it more now.
You can't do more than 100% audits. So it's always ramped. Gotcha.
Yeah, something like that. Something like that. So no, by far that's not the case. They're not ramping up, but they're still doing it, and the chances are always high. So they are still high. So it doesn't really make that much of a difference. On preparing, so on audit defense, what are the best advices? Okay, well, I'm always splitting this up. Before any audit starts, my advice to client is make sure that you are ready, that you know your environment, you know the risks, and if you want to take them, that you take them consciously, so that there's no surprises if you would have an audit, right? That's the main advice I can give. So make sure that you do understand your licensing rights, you do understand your environment. If you have any risks, well, I do have clients that say it is what it is. If they come, we'll see, right? But most of the clients I talk to, and that is, and they are very honest in that they say, if we use it, we're going to pay for it, right? If we need it, we're going to pay for it. That's maybe a better word. If we need it, we're going to pay for it. If we used it without realizing it's licensable and we don't really need it, then we prefer not to use it, and as such, not to have to license it, of course.
Right.
Logic. That's one of the tricky things with Oracle. It's very easy, especially when we talk database and even middleware, to have actually use or installations that trigger a licensing requirement that you didn't know about. So we find lots of optimization opportunities on those areas if we do projects, in advising the client, making sure they understand what they're using, and then they can determine what they actually require and then remediate anything that needs to be remediated. Well, remediation means that you move it on servers that require less performance because you don't need the performance that you added on. You can do it less, so you move it on an environment that requires less licenses, for instance. That's a possibility of remediation. Merging test and development environments onto fewer servers as such to reduce the licensing requirement, another possibility of remediation. That type of things we're talking about. So that's what the first thing to do. Second thing is know your rights. So Oracle will come in if they do an audit and they will start saying, you need to do this, you need to do that, you need to do here, you need to do there. That's the process, that's the time, etc. They control everything. First thing we do in audit defense is take away that control, right? We take back the control for the client. So we tell the client, okay, this, you don't need to do that. That, it's not a contractual right they have. This, be sure that you get an NDA signed, for instance. That's one of the primary things we do. So those kind of actions. So at the start of the project, or the start of an audit, know your rights. That's very important. During the audit, again, know your rights. If they ask you a question, is this related to that project or not? Because if it isn't, should you answer, right? If they can't, if you don't understand something, why do they ask a question? Ask. You're entitled to ask. It's unbelievable how many clients think, oh, we have an audit, we need to do whatever they ask us. No, you don't. That's not what an audit is. An audit is they come to check how you're using your software. So as long as you share that with them, not a problem. But they don't get the right to do and to ask whatever they want. That's not the case. If you get a report, make sure you understand every single thing which is in there. Again, very important, because a lot of clients, they say, oh, so much money, we'll have to pay. We have a risk. We need to pay up. We need to pay up. First, maybe there's mistakes in there. In 70% of the audit defense projects that we do, where we step on later in the project, we find a lot of mistakes. So the last time I did this, we started with a report that indicated 3.5 million license deficit. We kind of started saying there's mistakes here. After those mistakes got rectified, they kind of went down already with 1 million to 2.6.
Oh my gosh.
And then we started playing around with the licenses. And I started reviewing the details the client had reported to Oracle. And I started saying, well, wait a minute, why are they doing this? And why are they doing that? And why are they allocating this? If we do it this way, we allocate named user licenses instead of processor licenses. Okay, let me check with you how you're using this. Can we do this? Yes, we can do this. We got this down to 90K.
Wow. That's, I mean, what a story. You know, it's got to be so rewarding to do something like that.
Oh,
and
it's fun.
You know, and you guys, I've heard similar stories from Bob, you know, and you know, your service pays for itself. You know, what it does. It's fantastic. That's so dramatic. It's exciting. Yeah. You want to review my family budget? I would love
that's right. That's right.
That would be great.
Yeah. Well, anyway, it's just fun because we go for this, right? So we're doing an audit defense at the moment. Again, the same situation. We found quite a bit of risks. We worked with the client on finding ways, alternative ways of licensing, finding ways of removing unused software, that type of things. And we went from 2.6 to 0. Mm. So that's the fun of the work.
Yeah, that's the promise. Yeah,
fun.
that is great. So
well, I think we're out of
yeah.
time. Yeah.
Yeah.
Nele, thank you so much bringing your Oracle knowledge to us here on the podcast and to the audience in the United States. We very much appreciate your time today, and thank you so much.
And I
Thanks
hope
for
you enjoy the
inviting.
rest
It was
of the rest of your 20 degrees Celsius day.
That's right.
Yeah, I
can
think I'm
see
gonna
the
have
sun
an
out
early
there.
break. I think I'll have an early stop tonight and just go out and enjoy the sun. Indeed.
Good. All right.
Perfect.
All right. Thanks
Thank you,
again.
Nele.
Thank you.
All right. Take care. Bye.
Bye bye.